Thank you so much for you guys who have joined us. We are excited. We're going to get started here in just a minute to talk a little bit about Denver Moves Everyone, a citywide plan for identifying transportation solutions to make it easier to get where we want to go. So we're very excited to have you here, and we've got a lot of questions for you, and we'll get going here in just a minute. All right, thank you so much for everybody that has joined us. We are going to start in just 1 minute. We really appreciate you joining us for our virtual public meeting related to Denver Moves Everyone, our long-term strategic transportation plan for the city and county of Denver. So we'll get going in just 1 minute.
And Julie, for folks joining on the phone, maybe just describe the two main things this effort is focused on doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are so excited with this project, and we're so glad you guys could call in. For those of you on the phone, really what we're trying to do with Denver Moves Everyone 2050, so we're trying to establish a vision and goals for a better transportation future. What do we need? What do we need to be doing now to really improve transportation in the long run? And we're also looking to shape the investments to help Denver achieve those transportation goals. That's going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about tonight, is priorities and trade-offs, and where should the city and county of Denver be focusing when they're looking at long-term transportation investments. So feel free to use the chat as we're moving forward here, and I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So with that, next slide, Francisco, would you like to tell us a little bit about the Spanish translation option? Oh, Francisco, I believe you might be muted. We can't hear you. Well, I feel like we have a slight disconnect with Francisco on the Spanish translation. We cannot hear. So
I believe he's in the Spanish channel. I can try to read off the instructions on the screen for the folks that are on the phone, if that helps.
Anna Ritz, could you read us this language interpretation for us, please? Or are you in the Spanish channel as well?
I believe I am also in the Spanish channel.
Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can. Yep, we have a slide currently that says language interpretation.
Could you please walk people through what we'd like for everybody to have an opportunity if they would like to join the Spanish channel? Could you read them in Spanish and let them know how to do that?
Sure, yep. Okay, ¿en español?
Yes, please.
Okay. Para escuchar la importación, haga el favor de conectarse usando una tableta o computadora. Número 2. Pose el icono del globo en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. Número 3. Seleccione el lenguaje de su preferencia.
Terrific. Thank you so much for your help. So next slide, please. So we are excited tonight. We have a great panel of folks to ask questions to. We've got a whole series of polling questions. You're going to hear from a wide variety of folks that will introduce themselves as they start. My name is Julie Skeen. I am a communications and engagement lead for this project. We also have a mix of consultant staff and our city folks, as well as Sam Piper, who is our principal planner and our project manager for this project with the city and county of Denver. Next slide, please. So as you will see, we have 4 major things we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview. What is this project? What is it about? We're going to talk about one of our key deliverables, which is the State of the System report. We're going to talk a little bit about what that is, and we're going to ask you some interesting questions to really engage you and make sure you understand what these some of these data points related to transportation. Then we're going to get into a lively discussion around priorities and trade-offs. So we are in a phase now where we're really starting to think about how do we move forward with investing for the future of transportation. And we have a whole series of questions, and then we'll talk next steps. So we've got two groups on the call, and we're thrilled to have both groups. So we have a group on the Zoom call that is actually going to be seeing the presentation. And then we have a wonderful group of people on the phone. And so we'd like input from both of these groups. So if you are on the Zoom call, as we ask questions, you will see a Zoom poll. It will just pop up on your screen, and you can just click on any of your answers as you move forward. Additionally, the chat is open, so feel free. We would love, as you're going through, ask us your questions, give us your thoughts. We are going to be documenting everything from the chat, so we would love your participation. If you are on the phone, we would also like your participation. So hit 0 anytime you want to ask a question or ask for feedback or clarification, you hit 0. Additionally, when we get to the polling questions, you have the opportunity to answer as well. You will use the numbers on the keypad of your telephone. So you will be able to hit 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on what the responses for those answers are. So again, if you're on the Zoom call, or if you're on Zoom, you'll just actually answer it through Zoom chat. If you are a Zoom poll and put your ideas in chat, if you are on the phone, hit 0 to respond to questions, or provide us the specific results of the polling questions by hitting the numbers on your keypad. And we'll review that as we go through. Next slide, please. So with this, I'd like to have Sam Piper give us a little bit of background. Sam?
Awesome. Well, Julie, thanks for kicking us off, and thanks for everyone who's on the phone. It looks like we've got about 160 folks there and 75 or so on our webinar. Thank you all for taking your time out of your schedules to join us this evening to learn about Denver Moves Everyone, our strategic transportation plan for the future of transportation in Denver. On the next slide, you will see that we have been working on this project with many of you for over a year now. And we will go through what we have created using feedback from the community, as well as where we are headed. So this is a 2-year project. We kicked off in the summer of 2021, and we really were working on setting the foundation for the plan. What is our vision for the future of transportation in Denver? And what are the goals that we need to seek to achieve in order to further that vision? And as we moved in the second phase of the project, we thought about the vision and goals all the way out to the year 2050. And we presented to the community different scenarios of what could change in Denver and what we liked about those changes, as well as what caused concern. And so that was really related to finding the path forward, and that feedback can then be integrated into objectives that we can track to make sure that we make progress on where we want to head into the future. And so we've done a lot of talking about, what does the year 2050 look like? What is the future of transportation in Denver? And this evening, we want to pull back, and we want to understand your priorities for the long term, but also for the near term. And so we have a series of exciting questions that we'll be asking all of you to understand what your priorities and preferences are. The feedback that you're providing tonight will directly inform our near-term implementation strategy to make traveling in Denver better. And as we move through this phase of engagement and look towards the fall, we will be wrapping up Denver Moves Everyone and continuing to take your feedback to craft the final plan. So we're about 3/4 of the way through the project. We've got a few months left, and thanks to everyone who's been with us all along the way, and we appreciate those who are joining us for the first time. And I just want to say a huge shout out to the broader community for engaging in this project. We have reached every neighborhood in Denver. We've had more than 7,800 people participate in this plan, many people engaging in transportation planning for the first time, for people who have seen us out in the community at one of our many events, and we have more events which are happening during this phase of engagement. Please come join us, as well as our focus group participants. So just a big thank you for everyone contributing to the future of transportation in Denver. And the feedback that we've gathered to date has been central to informing the vision for Denver's transportation future, as well as the goals that we're orienting all of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure's work around. And so to read our vision, Denver moves everyone and everything with respect and care. Denver is a city of safe streets connected by sustainable mobility options, providing equitable access and opportunity for people who need it most. And so this is our future state of what Denver will look like in the year 2050 if we're successful implementing the goals of mobility, safety, sustainability, community, and quality, and integrating equity as a common theme into each of these pillars, which are orienting our work and our focus as we look to the future. So I'll pass it over to Julie. We just want to make sure everyone is following us. If you have any general questions about the project or where we're headed, Julie, please see if we have any questions to that end. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got some questions loading up from the folks on the phone as well as in the chat. Some of them are very specific. This is not, unfortunately, we're not going to get into specific lights at specific crosswalks in this meeting. However, I wanted to provide you with our email address, info@denvermoveseveryone.com. Lucy, if you could put that in the chat, info@denvermoveseveryone.com. If you have very specific questions, what we're going to focus on today is broader issues from a strategic perspective in terms of trade-offs and priorities. But we recognize some of these very individual questions need to be addressed as well. So with that, I do have one question. Sam, I was hoping you could answer. We had a question about somebody was curious about how we have equity sort of flowing through the different goals. So what is that? How does that actually work in real life? So what does that mean to integrate equity across all of our goals? Do you have any examples that you could provide us?
Certainly. So Denver Moves Everyone is our strategic plan. And so we want to use data to drive our decision-making as well as our funding priorities. And so in researching best practices when it comes to integrating equity into strategic plans like Denver Moves Everyone, one of the things that we learned is it's not ideal to have equity be kind of siloed into its own goal topic. Eliminating transportation inequities is a priority for DOTI as well as our city. And so in order to advance that, we really need to be integrating it into all of our work. And so the idea is that we want to have equity measures within our goal of mobility or sustainability as the goals go across. So to use a specific example, in the State of the System report, which we'll have a couple fun questions about so you can kind of understand more about that, what we learned is that some populations in Denver are more affected by poor air quality, those individuals living closer to the roads that carry more traffic. And what we also learned is that the people who live closer to those areas tend to be correlated with lower incomes and, again, are disproportionately affected by that bad air. And so by integrating a measure within our sustainability goals to track air pollution near those high traveled corridors and then work to eliminate those inequities that disproportionately affect the people who live closer to those areas, we can help to eliminate that systemic inequity in our system. So that's an example that is integrated into each of our goals. We have measures that we're tracking that we've demonstrated the existing condition today, and then we'll be working to eliminate as we program our investments for the future.
That sounds terrific. Thank you. We also got a question from Anthony that is great timing. It's like setting us up. He wants to talk a little bit about proposed sources of funding for transportation. So if you hang on with us, Anthony, in a few slides, we're actually going to be talking about exactly where those transportation funding sources come from and some feedback and specifically about what you would prioritize. So with that, we're going to move into the next section, which is the State of the System report. So next slide, Sam, would you like to tell us a little bit about this deliverable, which is on our website if you'd like to review it?
Absolutely. So for the past year, we've been working with the broader community to understand what transportation looks like today. And so an easy way to kind of think about the State of the System report is, what does transportation in Denver look like? And what does it feel like? And what impacts does the way that we travel have in our community? So this State of the System report is the culmination of over a year of outreach with the community, as well as a lot of new tools and technical analysis that demonstrate what transportation is like in Denver today. And it is a report, and it's on our website. We'll drop a link into the chat so that if you do want to dig into this report and understand more of the themes, you can do so. And so it is a comprehensive report. It's really built around the pillars, which are the goals for this plan, demonstrates how those goals were co-created with the broader community, and then dives into details of what does mobility look like, what does safety look like, what does sustainability look like, etc. And it's comprised of 3 major sections. The first is an overview of what does DOTI do? So I work for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and we have responsibility over all aspects of the street. And so this report provides easy to understand graphics that demonstrate the key responsibilities of the agency that I work for. And that's really important because as we work to improve transportation, we want to make it accessible for the public to understand what our agency does and what our responsibilities are. And then the second section provides an overview of Denver's transportation evolution. Even before Denver was settled as a city, transportation was critical to the Native American tribes who called this area home at the confluence of the Platte River Trail and the Cherry Creek. And so we start with that narrative, and we fast forward all the way to today. We demonstrate how streets were designed for people when Denver when it was first settled, and then slowly transitioned into a city designed around vehicles. And as we come to the modern era, where we're starting to think differently about how our streets are designed and built. And then the third section of the report is all focused around data and demonstrating different themes among our goals. And so we do a deep dive into those goals, and we'll use some questions so that you can gain a sneak peek of what content is in the report.
So with that, we're gonna get some input from you. And first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the folks on the phone. We are getting your comments in. Thank you for the folks on the chat. What you are giving us is fantastic feedback of things that we need to be thinking about. We're getting a lot of feedback on the chat around concerns about safety, concerns about equity relating to displacement, the conditions of our sidewalks. So keep this feedback coming. We don't have answers for everything tonight, but knowing what these concerns are is super helpful. So please keep that feedback coming on the phone. Hit 0 if you'd like to provide feedback, and as well as on the chat. So for now, we'd like to get into our polling questions. So these are examples. They're examples from the State of the System report of data points that we might find interesting, and then Sam can help us understand a little bit about how that's informing the overall study. So our first question, and so Lucy, would you like to put the Zoom poll up? Oh, wait, go back. Okay, hopefully nobody saw that. We got a little sneak peek here. So if you are on the phone, the question is, how do Denver's transit fares compare to other large cities? So we're talking about the cost of transit. If you're on the phone, hit 1 for most expensive, 2 for about the same, or 3 for least expensive. If you are on the Zoom call, just click on your results here for mobility question 1. So please give us your thoughts. We're going to go through a series of these pretty quickly. Again, the question is, how do Denver's transit fares compare to other large cities? 1 for most expensive, 2 about the same, and 3 for least expensive. Lucy, do we have some good results coming in? So in general, what we see is that Denver has the most expensive. That is the results coming in from the Zoom poll. Let's advance the slide. Sam, tell us what our answer is.
Yes, so the majority of folks were indeed correct. Denver, as we compare it to other cities, does have the most expensive base fare of large American cities. And so I'll just read quickly the mobility goal. So the mobility goal for Denver is a city that provides transportation choices that move all people and goods and services reliably, easily, and affordably. So affordability was a major theme that we heard through outreach in the lead up to our vision as well as our goals. And so when we dug into the data, it is true that not all transportation options are affordable. And when compared to other cities, transit in Denver is relatively expensive. And so that's something that we need to think about as we collaborate with RTD, the transit provider in the region, to think about transit in Denver.
Terrific. Thank you. So let's take our next one. So number 2, also related to our mobility goal that Sam just highlighted. So our mobility question is, how long does taking transit compare to driving in Denver? So 1, if you're on the phone, if you're on your Zoom, just click right on your answer. If you're on the phone, how long does it take transit to compared to driving in Denver? Number 1, taking transit is shorter. Number 2, taking transit takes about the same amount of time. And number 3, taking transit is more than 2.5 times as long as driving. So please click on the poll, or if you are on the phone, and one more time, how long does it take to travel via transit versus driving? Number 1 is it's shorter to take transit. Number 2 takes about the same amount of time. And number 3 is it takes 2.5 times as long. Lucy, let's see what our answers are. So this is a smart group. Number 3, taking transit is more than 2.5 times as long as driving. Sam, take us to the next slide.
Yeah, Julie, I'm thinking people have already read the state of the system report.
Oh, maybe they're cheating.
These answers are live. Yes, so it is true. And we've invested in new tools to understand travel patterns as well as travel time. Denver has ambitious goals to shift the way that we travel and provide better options for mobility. But one of the things we find is that in order for people to change the way that they travel, such as instead of driving, taking transit, transit needs to be competitive. And what our data demonstrates is that currently transit takes much longer. And for people who need to take transit, who don't have any other options, this has real impacts on their lives. That provides less time that they have for their family, less time to pursue an education, or less time to work and earn money. So it's something that we need to be cognizant about as we work to develop a better transportation system and make these options more competitive so that more people have reliable options that represent real alternatives to driving. And to dig into this for folks on the phone, we have a graphic on the slide. When we look at how people who identify as Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, they experience longer travel times across the board, whether it be driving, taking transit, compared to people who identify as white. So just something that we need to be understanding. And for the earlier question about how do we understand equity and integrate that into our goals, these are now benchmarks that we can use to establish so that we don't have any differences in how people identify in the future when it comes to travel time, reliability, or affordability.
Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you to the folks in the chat that said, hey, we are not cheating. We use this system. I appreciate it. You're the ones that we want on this call. So thank you very much. So let's go just a couple more questions. How have the number of traffic-related deaths per capita changed since 2012 to 2021? So looking over the past decade or so, how have the number of traffic-related deaths per capita changed? For those on the phone, number 1 for slightly increased, number 2 for slightly decreased, or number 3 for staying roughly the same. Or if you're on the Zoom call, just click directly onto the Zoom poll. One more time, how have the number of traffic-related deaths per capita in Denver changed over the last decade or so? Number 1, slightly increased. Number 2, slightly decreased. Or number 3, stayed roughly the same. Lucy, what are we hearing from folks? So we see slightly increased as what most people are saying, at least on the Zoom call. Sam, do you want to take us to the next slide and tell us?
Yes, unfortunately, again, the folks who have taken the poll are correct. Fatalities on our streets have trended up even when we control for population growth. So Denver's population grew by 100,000 people. And even with that rising increase in population, when we do the math, the trend line is still moving in a positive direction. And this is really caused by the pandemic. You can see in the year 2021, we had the highest rate of fatalities on our streets over the last decade. And so the trend is moving in the wrong direction. Denver is a Vision Zero city. We are committed to eliminating serious injuries and fatalities on our streets to zero. And what this data demonstrates is that remains a challenge to reach. And we need to do more. We need to be more proactive in this space to move that trend line in the right direction so that we can get to zero. So more work to be done, but it's really important for us to start breaking down, well, what is contributing to those serious injuries and fatalities on our streets. So the state of the system starts to break it down to understand areas in the city that represent a higher risk for serious injuries and fatalities, or how people choose to travel. Which of those choices, again, is more represented in those serious crashes? And so we can start to target those areas and provide safer travel options for those people who are more exposed to risk to really start to move this trend line in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. So let's go to our next one. Now we're talking about transportation emissions. So when you think of transportation emissions in terms of air pollution in Denver, how do they rank? If you're on the phone, number one is number one. They rank number one. Number two would be number two, and number three would be number three. So again, the question is, how do transportation emissions rank in terms of air pollution in Denver? So how much are they causing air pollution related to transportation emissions? So number one is they're the number one cause of air pollution. Number two, they're the number two cause of air pollution. And number three, they're the number three cause of air pollution. Lucy, what are we hearing from folks? Number one, is that correct, Sam? Let's go to the next slide and see.
That is correct again. Yes. So when we dig into the data, we do find that transportation is the number one contributor to air pollution in Denver. And for folks on the phone, we do have a graphic here that demonstrates the sources that contribute to air pollution. Transportation emissions represent 77% of all of that. And most of that percentage comes down to personal vehicles. So that's cars and trucks that people drive for most trips in Denver. And so what this represents is the fact that the way that the majority of people choose to travel today, most people in Denver drive, contributes to poor air quality. And this is something that all of us see, and it affects all of us. And when we dig into that data, as I mentioned when we kicked off, it does affect some communities more than others. Those streets that are really busy, that carry a lot of traffic, tend to have higher rates of air pollution, and that has an impact on their health. Higher rates of asthma are correlated with those areas as well. So we want to start understanding these trends. What are the reliable methods to mitigate the impacts that this is having on our community, and target the right investments to ameliorate the issues that are affecting communities disproportionately.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So two more quick questions, and then we'll move on. So what percentage, now we're into the community goal, what percentage of Denver's transportation system is dedicated to moving people? And what we mean by that are people in trains, on bike lanes, on bus lanes, or on sidewalks. So we're talking about the actual people outside of the roadways. What percentage of Denver's transportation system is dedicated to moving people? Number one on your phone would be 60%. Number two would be 40%. Number three would be 20%. Please let us know your thoughts. If you're on Zoom, just click right on the Zoom poll. If you're on the phone, one more time, what percentage of Denver's transportation system is dedicated to moving people? So that's trains, buses, sidewalks, bus lanes. Number one is 60%. Number two, 40%. And number three, 20%. Lucy, what are we hearing from folks? So 20% is the highest number for ranking for this. Sam, let's go to the next slide. Are they correct again? We are on a perfect roll with this group.
Yes, yes. So again, you picked the right answer. And one of the things that we talk about in the State of the System report, and we heard from community when we developed the vision and goals for this plan, was a desire to have more balance in our transportation system. So what this data demonstrates, if we think about space that's dedicated to more moving people versus space that's dedicated to travel lanes for vehicles as well as parking those vehicles, we can see that there's not balance in proportion today, with 20% dedicated to rail lines, sidewalks, bike lanes, and bus lanes versus 80% being dedicated to those road lanes and parking. We lack balance in our transportation system today. So when we think about moving people differently, improving safety, improving air quality, all the topics that we talked about earlier, what's critical is that we have more balance in the way that space is divided to provide reliable and safe options for people to travel other ways. if we are successful to that end, then we can start to work positively towards the other goals that we have in this plan. And so you can start to see that these are interrelated, but this is a new finding. We haven't done this analysis in the past, and it's critical to the community goal of creating streets that are really designed around moving people first.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you, Sam. So last question on the state of the system. So this is around our quality goal. So looking back from 2017 to 2021, what percentage change has DOTI seen in funding for maintenance and operations? So now we're talking about maintaining and operating the system. Over the last few years, have we seen an increase or a decrease? And so if you're on the phone, number one would be a 5% increase. Number two would be stayed the same. And number three would be an 8% decrease. So again, if you're on the Zoom poll, just click right on it. If you're on the phone, again, the question is between 2017 and 2021, what percentage change has DOTI seen in funding for maintenance and operations? Number one, 5% increase. Number two, stayed the same. Number three, 8% decrease. Lucy, what did folks think? So 8% decrease was what the vote was. Sam, take us to the next slide. I think we got a perfect score here.
Yes, 100% student group we have tonight. And again, 8% is the correct answer. And this information is important. When we looked across our goals, there's a lot of challenges that our transportation and our community faces with the way that our system is designed today. But it's also critical that we think about a quality transportation system, keeping up with what we have existing. And when we look at our financial data, we've actually seen that we're reducing the amount that's dedicated to keeping our system in good shape. And that has real impacts on all the ways that people travel, whether you're walking, you're bicycling, driving, or taking transit. And so we actually have some questions for you this evening about how should we spend the different investment buckets in our transportation system, with maintenance being one of them. Riley will lead that question in 20 or 30 minutes here. So be thinking about this, be thinking about how that has declined. But if it declines, then we have more bumps and cracks on our streets. So there's real consequences to this, and we're interested to help you inform how we think about investments as we look to the future.
Mm-hmm. Terrific.
So those questions were really to gain interest in the breadth and the depth of the State of the System report. And we dropped a link. Thank you, Lucy, for dropping that link to the entire people who joined us. And for folks who are on the phone, you can email us. Maybe Julie, you could reiterate that email when you come back to the question break. But really, this report is intended to illuminate the challenges as well as the opportunities to create a world-class transportation system in Denver. We have ambitious goals, and we need to understand what are those challenges and opportunities that represent the things that we need to work either to improve or to continue to push in the right direction if the trend is already there. And equity being that cross-cutting theme within each of the goals of mobility, safety, sustainability, community, and quality. We've worked with the community to understand, well, what does mobility mean? What does safety mean? What does sustainability mean? What is important to you? And we've demonstrated using data inequities that exist across these goals when it comes to transportation and access. And so all of the data and the statistics that we have used in the State of the System report will become the benchmarks by which we gauge success as we look to the future. And so this is a really critical baseline that we're establishing today, and also an effort to be a more transparent agency with the community. As we get into the fourth phase of the project, we're going to be working on establishing new dashboards that demonstrate how we're doing on tracking the project on these goals. And so we'll be pushing those dashboards out to the broader community so you can understand how we're doing and weigh in on how you think we should continue to invest to make improvements to achieve these goals.
Next slide.
And so we are proud of this work, but it underscores we have a lot more work to do. And so we encourage you to take a look at this report, email us if you have any questions. And we just wanted to emphasize that we're using new data to understand travel that we haven't had access to in the past. We emphasize using graphics that are accessible and easy to read. And it really is intended to be a report that describes our functions. And so you can more easily understand our responsibilities as well as where we're headed. So take a look when you have time and shoot us a note if you have any more questions. So Julie, I'll pass it back to you and see if we can ask some questions from the group.
Thank you so much. So a couple things for the folks on the phone. If you are interested in the state of their system report, the easiest, the shortest website is bit.ly/Denver Moves Everyone. So again, if you're interested on the phone to check out the state of the system report, bit.ly/Denver Moves Everyone. And as also a reminder, if you'd like to reach out to us directly, it's info@denvermoveseveryone.com. So lots and lots of questions. I think what I'm mostly seeing, Sam, on the chat is our challenges. We have lots and lots of challenges. We wouldn't be spending the time and energy on this type of study if we didn't. But we're getting, highlighting about the conditions of sidewalks and conditions of bike lanes and how our infrastructure is very focused on roadway, health issues with transportation. Boy, we're just getting the full gamut here. So I think maybe what would be helpful is we could take a step back, Sam, if I could ask you, talk a little bit about, at the end of the day, what is this plan going to accomplish? What are we doing that at the end is going to result in actually addressing some of these challenges? Because I really feel like our folks on the phone want to roll up their sleeves and they want to really get into the details on this. And we're staying pretty high level in this presentation. So if you could connect the dots for us, how is it at the end of the day, how is this plan going to help us address the challenges that are being identified by the folks on the phone and on the Zoom call?
Absolutely. So when we kicked off Denver Moves Everyone, we looked across the country to understand how did other cities approach strategic planning. And one of the things that we found is that many agencies, they may establish aspirational goals, but what is lacking is a roadmap that demonstrates what is the path needed in terms of investments and strategies and policies that proactively work towards reaching those goals over the plan's horizon. And so what we're working hard to do is simultaneously establishing long-term visions and aspirational goals that we want to hit. But then we're doing the hard work to demonstrate, well, what are the specific projects, programs, services, and policies that we need to implement starting now, starting in the next year, the next 2 years, the near term, in order to make stepwise progress on reaching those goals. And so we're doing both simultaneously. It is a big lift, it's a big effort. But what this plan will result in is a fiscally constrained, and by that I mean we have a max dollar amount of how much we're going to invest in the next 6 years. And we're going to develop a program of projects that have the best chance of moving the needle on the goals and eventually reaching our vision. This also establishes a process by which we can track success towards reaching those goals, which is something that many agencies lack. They don't have a systematic way to track success. And when you can't do that, when you can't be a performance-driven organization, it's difficult to understand how you're doing and how you need to make changes to get back on track. And so we'll continually be evaluating those tracking tools to make sure, are we being successful? And if we're not, what do we need to do to get back on track? So this is really a functional plan with lots of new tools that help us make sure we are delivering on the vision and the goals that the community has emphasized are most critical for our transportation future.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Because again, we're collecting all this information. Keep these challenges coming, keep your concerns coming. I mean, we're getting everything from materials to build roads, which is excellent, asking questions about that. We have a great question about what does maintenance mean? Hold on, we're about to get into that into our next section. And really in the next section, we're going to start talking about priorities and this investment piece that Sam was highlighting, because it's really, at the end of the day, this plan, we need to establish our values and goals, but then it's really going to take it out to really what are those projects that need to be completed and where's the funding, how do we prioritize our funding? So lots more fun to come. We can come back to more questions here in a minute, but I think I'd like to hand it over to Taylor next. Would you like to kick us off to start talking about priorities and trade-offs?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Julie. My name is Taylor Phillips, and I am also a city planner at the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So yeah, just like Julie mentioned, this is our third phase of engagement, the third time that we've come to you to ask questions about your priorities for transportation in Denver. And right now we're really talking about the trade-offs that we need to make as city planners to prioritize funding and for programs and projects. Next slide, please, Julie. So I'm going to kick us off and kind of talk about our approach for how we're getting the word out about our online survey and how we're trying to collect surveys in person. Because, you know, as Sam said earlier, equity is one of our cross-cutting measures, and we're trying to make sure that people who we don't normally hear from are able to tell us their thoughts on how we should prioritize our funding for transportation in Denver. So far we've held, or we're going to hold, about 8 large citywide events that will target folks from all over Denver. We're about to start on 5 creative input sessions. So those are kind of like focus groups where diverse communities are going to come and talk to us. In the past, we've done some transcribing and some poetry related to those. And then we're going to have a little over 40 hyper local events. And I'll talk about those on the next slide a little bit with our community-based outreach partners. And at all of these events, we're going into the community, and we are trying to, we're going to tables, and we're disseminating surveys. We're telling folks to go online and take the survey. Next slide, please, Julie. And next slide, I'm sorry, I think I spoke too soon on this slide and meant to go to the next one. So as I just mentioned, our community-based outreach partners, or we call them CBOPs. These are members of the community who were paying a stipend to go to these events and help us distribute those paper surveys and get the word out about Denver Moves Everyone. Several of those folks speak Spanish, and we've translated the survey so that folks who English isn't their first language can fully participate in this phase of engagement. So we're really excited about this team of community-based outreach partners, since this is the first time the city's been able to do something like this. And we're really hopeful that this becomes a model for how we do more equitable engagement in the future. Next slide. So yeah, as Sam was mentioning earlier, so our approach for engagement through Denver Moves Everyone is to really elevate the feedback that we hear from our diverse and inclusive voices outreach. That's what DEVO stands for. Feedback strategies that I just mentioned. So this is going into the communities that we have a hard time hearing from. This is typically BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, people who are low income, and really trying to elevate the feedback that we hear from them. So anytime we have that technical milestone, such as right now, we're reaching out into the community, we're asking them their thoughts, and then they're making sure that they know that we've heard them. So by doing this, we're hoping to show folks how their feedback is being used and how much it matters to us and how important it is to the Denver Moves Everyone process. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Riley and going to give us one quick plug. The website has launched. Help us get the word out. Head to denvermoveseveryone.com if you haven't already after this meeting to fill out the survey and tell us what you think about where we should, how we should prioritize transportation projects in Denver. And with that, I'm going to kick it to Riley to give us an overview of the survey and the tool itself.
All right, thanks so much, Taylor. And again, that survey will help us to help DOTI determine where we should spend our money and also what your priorities would be as the community. So it's really important to take that survey. So I'm Riley Lemie with DOTI's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. I'm a planner there as well. And I'm going to talk about how DOTI invests its dollars to build out the Denver's transportation system. So running a transportation system is kind of like taking care of a home because it involves maintenance, it involves improvements, expansions, and operations. So I'm going to be using that analogy as I talk through each of these different categories. So let's talk about maintenance as the first one. You can kind of think of maintenance as taking care of a home. It means fixing things that are not working great, like a leaky faucet or a roof, and these types of repairs keep the home in good shape. Maintaining streets is similar because it means fixing cracks and potholes or repaving the roads to keep them in good shape as well. If a home is larger or as it ages, it can cost more to maintain. And the same is true for growing a transportation system. More maintenance dollars means more maintenance dollars are needed to keep the system in good shape. So the next one I'll talk about is making improvements. You can think of improvements like upgrading a home to make it work better. So like replacing windows or using energy efficient light bulbs to reduce electricity costs. So you take what you have and you make it work better. Improving the streets is kind of similar. It means making a slow bus route faster and take less time. It could mean making an existing bike lane more comfortable with an improved design, or it could mean replacing a narrow sidewalk with a wide one with larger trees for shade. And all of these parts of the street might have existed before, but we're talking about making improvements so that this part of the street we make the street work better. So next I'll talk about expansion. And again, going back to the house analogy, we'll think of this as making a house bigger. An example might be you add a room to a house so that everyone in your home has more options to move around. Expanding streets means adding new bus routes, new comfortable bikeways, new sidewalks, things or infrastructure that didn't exist before, but that helps people be able to connect to new places. So these different things might add options and give you more ways for how you move about the city. And so that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about expanding the system. And then lastly, I'll talk about operations. So you can think of operations, again, going back to the house analogy, is the people and tools needed to keep a home in good shape. So think of like the daily chores that you do, for example. The more help that you have, the easier it is to keep your home in good repair. Street operations is the people and resources that are needed to make our transportation system work every day. So as Denver grows, it requires a bigger crew of people and more tools to keep that system up to date and running smooth. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about where DOTI's funding comes from. So everybody in Denver contributes to building out Denver's transportation system. Some of this comes from voter approved bonds, like the ones that were recently passed in 2021 and 2017. Some of this comes from sales tax or fees such as parking or permits. And sometimes special funding comes from grants. The remaining funding comes from property taxes that are paid if you own a home, or they might be included if you pay rent and they may be added as part of the rent, as well as operating a business. So then there's those sales taxes for owning a business. So what this works out to is about $16 a month that each person pays in Denver to build out a transportation system. So on the next slide, you'll see that currently about 25 cents of every dollar is used to invest in or to expand and improve Denver's transportation system. So again, I talked about those 4 investment categories earlier. Currently, about 25 cents for every dollar is used to expand or improve Denver's transportation system. The remaining is used to either maintain or operate that system. All right, so if we'll go to the next slide. So it's important for us to understand how you would spend Denver's transportation dollars. Something that we oftentimes face at DOTI is there's a lot more need than the resources that we have available at any given time. So that's why it's important for us to understand what's most important for you as a community and understand how you would prioritize how DOTI invests. So this feedback is going to help us to determine how we should prioritize projects and funding and help us understand, are there areas where we're not investing enough and we should be investing more, or are there areas where we're investing too much and we should be in, or projects where we're investing in that maybe we shouldn't be. And so this will help us to take a better look at that. So again, this can be broken down into the 4 main categories. So operating streets, once again, just means everything that we need to do to keep our streets going, all the equipment that's used to construct new projects, maintain our streets like our plows and our street sweepers. And then improving streets means making our existing streets, again, work better. So that might mean making a dedicated transit lane so that a bus could go quicker. It might mean replacing a narrow sidewalk with a wider one. Might also mean making a narrow bike lane wider. And then expanding, once again, is providing new travel options that didn't exist before. So this could be, again, putting in a bike lane that didn't used to exist. It could be adding new transit service that didn't exist prior, or filling in sidewalk gaps. And then finally, maintaining streets is fixing cracks, potholes, replacing street signs that are in disrepair or have fallen off, or replacing street lights, and even making repairs to bridges and things like that. So on the next slide, we're actually going to ask everyone participating in this call to answer that question of where you would invest. Is it operating Denver's system, improving Denver's system, expanding Denver's system, or maintaining Denver's system? So I'm going to pass it to Julie, who's going to kind of help facilitate that question.
You bet. Thank you so much, Riley. So as you've seen, we've organized this question into the 4 main categories. And this first question we're going to ask is, if you had to pick one, what would be your highest priority? So for those of you on the Zoom call, just click on the result. If you are on the phone, here are our answers. So how would you spend Denver's transportation dollars? What would be your highest priority? Number 1 would be spending that money on operating Denver's system. 2 would be improving Denver's system. 3 would be expanding Denver's system. And 4 would be maintaining Denver's system. So again, this is your highest priority. If you had to pick one that says, okay, you got to take the money, this is where you should prioritize it. Again, number 1, operating. Number 2, improving. 3, expanding. And 4, maintaining. So please give us your thoughts. I know we have questions in the chat about a sliding scale answer. We're just trying to get a gut check here. So just give us what you would think is your highest priority, knowing that we would obviously have to balance across these 4. Lucy, what are we hearing? So in general, at least the results from the Zoom, and we will gather the results from the phone as well, improving seems to be Denver's, seems to be the number 1 highlight. Riley, did you want to add anything on that, or should we move to the next?
I think we can move to the next.
Great. So same question, but now we're going to the other end of the spectrum. So if you have money to spend, how would you spend Denver's transportation dollars? What would be your lowest priority? So if improving in general, at least for the folks on the call or on the Zoom, would be improving. So number 1, lowest priority. Number 1, operating Denver's system. Press 1 on your phone. Number 2, press 2 on your phone for improving Denver's system as your lowest priority. Number 3, expanding Denver's system as your lowest priority. And number 4, maintaining. So again, if you're on the phone, how would you spend these dollars? What's your lowest priority? Number 1, operating. Number 2, improving. 3, expanding. And 4, maintaining. Please let us know your thoughts.
And Julie, while we're waiting for those results to come in, I thought I'd just add, in terms of that sliding scale, we do have this question up on the www.denvermoveseveryone.com website, and it does provide you the opportunity to provide more nuance in your answers. So as Taylor plugged it, and I'll say it again, go check out that website. It is open through the end of June, so there's plenty of time to take it. And please share this same tool across your networks, your family, friends, your coworkers. The more people we can engage, the better.
Thank you so much, Sam. DenverMovesEveryone.com. Absolutely. We'll keep reminding you of that, because we are doing a simplified version, as Sam said, for this call, but there's a little bit more opportunity for comment in the tool. Lucy, what are we hearing for some folks? In this one, it was expanding. So at least the folks on the Zoom poll, and again, we're collecting feedback from the phone as well, but at least the folks on this call thought improving is the top priority and expanding as the lowest priority. And we are getting some comments, and you're right, there's a lot of nuance here, that the more you spend on improving, then the more you have to maintain. We recognize there was relationships in here. But again, at a very high level, we're trying to get kind of a big picture gut reaction from the folks on the phone and the folks on the call on what you think your highest and lowest priorities would be. So thank you for your feedback on that. Riley, would you like to take us to the next?
All right, so go ahead and go to the next slide. And so this page that is on the screen shows an example. So for those of you that are joining on the phone, shows an example from the online tool. A minute ago, we asked you to help us determine or help give your feedback on what should be the highest and lowest priority in terms of those different investment categories that DOTI invests its dollars. We want to take a deeper dive into two of them and talk about how you think Denver should invest for each of the different topics as far as expanding or improving Denver's system. So in other words, what we want to know for each of the different areas, what would be your preference in terms of expanding the system or improving it? And again, remember that expanding the system means creating new infrastructure that didn't exist before, and improving it might mean making what we have work better. So let's take sidewalks, for example, on the next slide. Thank you. So expanding Denver's system or expanding sidewalks might mean completing sidewalk gaps on neighborhood streets so that they have fewer gaps. So that way you can walk on a continuous path and have fewer gaps. Improving the system might mean taking a narrow sidewalk that exists today and widening it and making it so that it has a better amenity zone or more trees, and making that a more comfortable sidewalk to walk on. So we're going to ask that question again for what you would improve. Would you expand Denver's system or improve Denver's system when it comes to sidewalks?
Thank you so much, Riley. So again, your Zoom poll is up. If you are on Zoom, click on it. For those of you on the phone, again, we're talking sidewalks. And so press 1 if you would feel like the priority should be expanding Denver's system of sidewalks. Number 2, improving Denver systems of sidewalks. And again, expanding, for example, having fewer gaps in the sidewalk system. Improving for sidewalks, as an example, making sure that sidewalks along major busy streets are wider and more comfortable. So again, how should Denver prioritize transportation improvements and sidewalks? If you're on the phone, press 1 for expanding, press 2 for improving. Lucy, what sort of results did we get from the Zoom? Almost a dead heat. So we have it's a mix. So we got about 52% of the folks, and again, this is just the Zoom call. We will grab the feedback from the phone as well. 52% said expanding and 48% said improving. So we were almost tied on that one. Would you like to take us to the next one, Riley?
All right, so now we're going to talk about bicycle infrastructure. So expanding Denver's system might mean building out more bikeways in more places. So building out a more complete network all over the city, but with temporary materials that connect to more places. Whereas improving this system might look like building out more bikeways in fewer places, but investing more in permanent materials, kind of like you see on 14th Street in downtown. So for this question, again, we'll ask, how should Denver prioritize transportation improvements on bikeways? And would you rather see us expand or improve? So Julie, I'll hand it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Riley. So our Zoom poll is up. Please click on your selection. If you are on the phone, 1 for expand, 2 per improve. And again, we are talking specifically about bikeways. Expanding would be building out, connecting more places. Improving would be making sure they're built with permanent materials, connecting fewer places, improving the existing system, or expanding the system of bikeways. What do you guys think? Number 1 for expand, number 2 for improve. Lucy, what sort of feedback have we gotten? So again, pretty close on this one. What we're seeing for the folks on the Zoom is a little bit more of an interest in improving Denver's system rather than expanding it. So really looking at making sure that we have the best system possible before we spend a lot of money on expanding, although we had a higher percentage on expanding as well. I did want to take us up very quickly because we got an interesting question in the chat that I thought either Sam maybe or Taylor, there was an interesting consideration of how are we thinking about, for example, so we're back to this equity concept. How are we thinking about equity when we think about expanding or improving sidewalks or bikeways? How does that relate to an equity perspective? I'm not sure, Riley or Sam or Taylor, who would like to talk about that a little bit?
Taylor, yeah, you want to go first and I can fill in if needed?
Yeah, I can definitely go first. Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we're talking about prioritizing projects, we're thinking about, where do people who need this infrastructure the most live? Where do people who rely on biking and walking live and where are they going? So we're trying to we have a ton of citywide data on race, income, and other metrics that are associated typically with disproportionate outcomes. And we are using that data and the feedback from this survey to try to target investments in areas where folks need it most and where we've historically been not investing. So that's a good example of that is a lot of Southwest Denver and a lot of kind of the far Northeast Denver have a lot of folks who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC. And we're trying to target a little bit more investments in sidewalks and transit infrastructure and bikeways and kind of those areas. Sam, anything else to add there? Great, thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's go on to our next one. So the next we want to address, same question, bus routes.
All right.
Riley?
So next we're going to talk about transit or bus routes. So again, going back to the examples of expanding or improving. So expanding, spending our money for transit, for expanding the system might look like adding more buses or creating new bus routes that weren't there before, or it could mean creating new neighborhood shuttles that didn't exist. Whereas improving the system might mean adding frequency to the existing bus routes that exist today, and improving the experience that you might have when you ride an RTD train, for example. So again, we'll ask this question: how should Denver prioritize transportation improvements on bus routes? Is it expanding Denver's system or improving Denver's system?
Great, thank you, Riley. So same as before, for those of you on the Zoom, just click on your result. If you are on the phone, number 1 would be expanding, number 2 would be improving. And again, we're talking specifically about bus routes, expanding, connecting more places, improving, connecting major destinations, matching the experience of RTD trains, for example. So again, if you're on the phone, number 1 for expanding, number 2 for improving. Lucy, what sort of results are we seeing? Big difference in this one. That's interesting, at least for the folks on the Zoom call. We are seeing 81% are saying that our bus routes first need to be improved. Then 19% are saying expanding. So I think that's very interesting. And some of the comments on the chat are linking a lot of this to frequency. So one thing, I think there's a lot of people that are focusing on improving Denver's system by looking at increasing frequency. I think that's a really interesting point, and this is one we've seen a lot of different responses on, so that's great. Terrific. And I think we've got one more. Is that right, Riley?
Yep. So we've got one more on green spaces, and so again, expanding Denver's system when it comes to green spaces, and that could mean anything from trees or landscaping, green infrastructure, or even public spaces. So expanding Denver's system for green spaces could look like streets with additional grass and landscaping and kind of modest improvements in more places. Or it could mean, on the improving side of things, it could mean in fewer places, but kind of having more robust streetscaping or landscaping. So with larger trees. So think about like the 39th Avenue Greenway, doing that in a couple places on the improving side of things, whereas the expanding might mean more expanding the tree canopy, or again, providing more opportunities for landscaping within the public right-of-way. So again, on this last question, again, how should Denver prioritize transportation improvements on green spaces? Would you rather see us expand or improve?
So great. As we've done before, if you're on the phone, number 1 is expanding Denver's system. Number 2 is improving Denver's system. And again, we're talking specifically about green spaces, expanding, adding shade, grass, and trees, or selecting streets with large trees that exist in Denver and supporting and improving those. So number 1, expanding Denver's system, and number 2, improving Denver's system if you're on the phone. Lucy, what are we hearing? So again, this one is a little bit more focused on expanding. So 63% again of the folks on the call or on the Zoom specifically are leaning more toward expanding Denver's system than improving Denver's system related to the green spaces. So thank you so much for your help and for your feedback. As Sam reminded us, denvermoveseveryone.com. There are additional questions. There's additional nuance that you can kind of factor in, and we would love to hear your thoughts. So please help us get the word out about that tool, denvermoveseveryone.com. We would love your feedback. Then I think you have one more slide, right? To kind of talk about how we're going to use this information.
All right, awesome. So thanks, Julie. And as Julie just mentioned, there are some additional questions on the online tool. So we will be tracking the results of this by neighborhood, which will tell us by each neighborhood what is most important within that community. And we do recognize that priorities may shift depending on the neighborhood. You may have one neighborhood, for example, that has a lot of really busy streets and that present barriers, and maybe for them the priority is improving the sidewalks, making them wider so that that street doesn't feel as much like a barrier. In another neighborhood, there may be a lot of missing sidewalk gaps, and so the priority for them is filling in those gaps first. So it's really important for us as DOTI to understand what those priorities are, and so we will be interpreting those results by the neighborhood. So with that, I'm going to transition it to Sam, who's going to help wrap us up.
So real quick before Sam, before we, if you don't mind, I just wanted to kind of highlight, boy, we've got a lot of feedback in the chat, and I wanted to kind of pull out some key themes of what we're hearing. We would like to see you to stay engaged in this process. The feedback that you're providing is absolutely essential because it will inform some of the discussions we are having, especially around prioritization. And so by identifying these challenges, so we are seeing a really broad theme. There's been a lot of themes around infrastructure, and the infrastructure not being to the level that we would like to see it, whether it's related to bike lanes specifically. We are hearing equity is definitely a theme that we're hearing through, and some of the nuance of this. You know, we have presented this at a very high level, but there are, especially when you put the lens over the lens of what does this mean for individuals who are Black or Indigenous or people of color? Do they have a different experience with this? And what does it mean to expand and improve depending on where you are in the city? So we recognize that there's a lot of nuance. That's why keeping this feedback coming is really, really important. So I think other feedback we've seen is RTD, needing more transit, needing more high frequency transit. There's some comments in the chat around building a subway or taking on some of RTD's responsibilities within the city. So I think there's a lot of interest in feedback in transit. There are a lot of comments around how do we prioritize the space that Denver has, you know, so there are comments around we should make sure that we are prioritizing space, more space for bikes, more space for pedestrians, for example, less space for parking cars. So a lot of focus on that, a lot of focus on, you know, again, this need for participants to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. So really great questions that we're seeing. You know, again, where we are in this process, I would like to maybe get a little bit more feedback from our panel here. How are we going to address in this plan? So for example, we've got some very, very specific questions related to RTD and RTD services and how those need to be improved for the people that are experiencing transit in the city. So Sam or somebody else in the panel, do you want to talk about, again, how is this plan at the end of the day going to help us resolve some of those issues? What types of projects would we potentially prioritize to address our bus service concerns that are being identified in the chat?
Awesome. You know, Julie, I'm just thinking maybe Riley, if you could describe how RTD operates today and what its relationship is to DOTI, to the agency that we work for, and then I can add in kind of how we're kind of considering that as we look to the future. So do you think you could just kind of describe how RTD works today in Denver and its relationship to our streets?
Yeah, definitely. So RTD operates the transit service, as many of you know. So not only do they operate the bus routes, but they also operate the rail as well. But we do work really closely with RTD, and we do work closely so that way we can make improvements to how their service operates. So an example of that might mean that we provide a dedicated travel lane so that the transit that's operating on a particular street doesn't experience delay during traffic. or we may also make modifications to signals so that the buses get priority and we can go ahead of general traffic. So those are some of the ways that we work really closely with RTD to provide transit service.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Riley. And in 2019, Public Works, as we were known at the time, was voted through a vote of the people of Denver to become the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. With that change, we have now the opportunity to operate transit service as an agency. We couldn't, by our charter, do that in the past. We now can. And so through Denver Moves Everyone, we're understanding what is the need, what is operations look like, what are the costs associated with that, and where could that pay more dividends. We moved into this space for the very first time in the Mount Bello neighborhood through the implementation of what we call the Mount Bello Connector. It's kind of like an Uber or Lyft. It's an on-demand shuttle that people can use for free to travel within their neighborhood. And we found that that service has been really successful, especially for people who rely on transit. It helps to provide that critical link to get to those larger stations that can then bring them further out of the neighborhood. So as we think about transit and RTD, they're going to remain a really strong partner, but we want to think about through DME, should Denver take a larger role in providing transit service in our city? So that's something we're investigating, and the feedback that you provided tonight is helpful in pointing us in one direction or the other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Kind of a question along a similar vein. There are a lot of very passionate people on the call and on our Zoom around bikes, and a lot of questions about protected bike lanes and concerns about safety for bicyclists. So something sort of a similar, along the same lines kind of question: how will this study evaluate the role of bikes and the prioritization of bikes, especially things like protected bike lanes? So how do you see this playing out as part of our study related to a lot of the concerns that we're seeing on the chat relating to bicycle safety?
Yeah, so maybe I could pass this one over to Taylor. Taylor has done a lot of work on organizing street space to provide safer ways for bicyclists to travel. And that goes to new guidelines for how we can design streets, as well as better designs, safer designs for bicyclists. So Taylor, could you just explain some of the work that you've been focused on and how that weaves into our future vision for prioritizing bikes as a safe and convenient way to travel?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like a lot of folks in the chat are saying, bikes are a really efficient and sustainable way to get around compared to driving a car, especially. So we're trying to, and we have a modal hierarchy, as we kind of call it, we put pedestrians at the top, and then transit and bicycles kind of our next priority. And then further down we get like freight, and then single occupancy and carpooling and driving and things like that. And so we're really trying to prioritize that space to connect people to the places they want to go via bike. And we're trying to do that by prioritizing high comfort bikeways, as we call them. So that's those protected bikeways where you're separated from vehicle traffic with a physical barrier, or our neighborhood bikeways, which we only have a few of those in Denver so far, but we're really working on building out our network of neighborhood bikeways in the next couple of years. And those are bikeways where there's very low volumes of vehicles, very low speeds, that it feels comfortable to ride right in the middle of the street, because you're not going to see a car too often passing you. So yeah, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, thanks for that overview, Taylor. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Terrific. I think we have time for a couple more. I saw some interesting questions about RTD and DOTI needing to be on the same page. We were just having a discussion about that partnership, and I can answer that question, which is, we have a series of technical working groups. We have we call our think tank, which is a group of external stakeholders, and RTD is at the table with us. So we've been doing a series of focus groups with them, that we've been meeting with them regularly to discuss prioritization and the systems optimization plan that they've got going on. And so did want to highlight that RTD is a significant part of this project, and we are partnering with them. This is not, us working on different, on different pages. Everybody's kind of working together. Another question, Sam, that I thought was kind of interesting, and it related, now we're switching gears a little bit to maintenance. And so the question is, how do you uncouple the concept of maintenance with expanding or improving? So if by nature you're going to expand a system, doesn't that by default mean you have to spend more money in maintenance? And how is the team thinking about that when you're prioritizing these large categories?
Absolutely. So whoever asked that question is absolutely correct. When we expand or we improve the system, then our maintenance responsibilities increase. And so we need to think about how we manage a growing system and how do we resource those maintenance dollars so what we're building stays in good shape. And so through a strategic plan, again, some agencies, they have those aspirational goals, they build out, but they don't fill up that maintenance bucket appropriately. So the system stays in good shape. So through Denver Moves Everyone, we're actually understanding if we were to increase bus routes or if we were to increase our bikeways, what would the maintenance implication of those changes be so that we can have real conversations about how we keep everything in good shape as our system grows. So I just wanted to emphasize, we are researching that, we're understanding the implications, and that will be embedded into the plan so that we can create a better transportation system that's kept in good shape.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Thank you. That's very helpful. We also had a few questions about partnerships. I think this is kind of getting back into that transit discussion. Is the city looking at their own partnerships with Lyft, Uber, Lime, the scooters? What does DOTI see as their role with some of these other transit mobility options?
Yeah, so I think the old adage goes, it takes a village. I'm going to say it takes a region and it takes partnership. So I saw in the chat folks mentioning don't compete with RTD, partnership. And yes, that's where success is going to be found. In addition to that, Lime and Lyft have come to our city and provided scooters. And in the state of the system, we demonstrate that they have replaced millions of vehicle trips on our streets. So they're aligned with our goals of sustainability, as well as providing competitive travel options that provide a reasonable alternative to driving. And we do recognize that there's challenges associated with scooters on our streets. I think as I'm mentioning this, I'm probably seeing, the parking issues, the things that we need to manage when we look across a broad transportation system that is moving people all sorts of different ways, just like when we have issues with where cars are parked or big trucks are loading or serious crashes that are caused by folks who are driving too fast. So while in the same vein, we are forging those partnerships, there's also challenges that we need to manage. But the point is that the more partnerships that we can forge, the more options we can provide our community. And we want to be innovative and novel to address these challenges that are really pressing. When we think about safety, when we think about climate change, we don't have the time to not act quickly. And so by partnering with both private companies as well as forming stronger partnerships with RTD or municipal cities around the region, we can start to make more steady progress on the trends that we emphasize in the state of the system.
Terrific. Couple more before we do our wrap up, just because I think these questions are really, really interesting. One question we got was, when you talk about maintenance, do we have a sense, and maybe this is in the state of the system report, I apologize, I don't know, how far behind are we? When we think state of good repair and maintenance requirements for the city, do we have, or are we working to identify how much need there is from a maintenance perspective? Kind of how far behind the curve are we to be able to get our system up to the level of quality that we'd like to see?
Yeah, yes, and through Denver Moves Everyone, we're going to, within our quality goals, that's really about keeping our system in good shape. We're going to establish benchmarks for all of the major things that people see when they travel on streets. So how good of condition are traffic signals? How good of condition are our streets? How good of condition are our sidewalks, our bus stops, as well as our bikeways and other major things that just when you're out traveling, you see. And this is information that we have in different buckets today, but we haven't collectively developed it in a strategic way that then we can track, well, which category needs more help and which category is doing pretty good. We don't have unlimited maintenance dollars and we never will in the future. And so we need to think about how we can use those dollars most wisely to help bring those in areas of the streets to a better state of repair that need the most help. So yes, we do have some of that information. We're going to make it more cohesive through Denver Moves Everyone, and it will be published through this plan to provide a comprehensive inventory of our streets today so that we can better program investments in maintenance for the future.
Mhm. So we had a question, does DOTI have responsibility over the sidewalks, or is that a shared responsibility? That was one of the questions that we had related specifically to sidewalks.
Totally. So within the State of the System report, we do emphasize that parts of the street that the people see aren't all DOTI's responsibility. So sidewalks in the city today are the responsibility of property owners. So once they are constructed, they become the responsibility of that adjacent property owner, both when it comes to repairs as well as it comes to, hey, we just had a snowfall. That property owner is responsible for going out and shoveling.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there were some questions about looking in the State of the System report, wanting a little bit more information about sidewalks. Apparently, we don't have as much in there. I didn't know if that was something that we would be sharing in another forum, specifically around the state of the current conditions of sidewalks. We have some folks that are very interested in the chat about that.
Yeah, in fact, if we're kind of driving there through the Elevate Denver bond, we established a sidewalk construction program. And so prior to 2017, Public Works and DOTI now didn't construct sidewalks separate from a major roadway reconstruction. It's just a standalone program. But through Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails, which is our citywide plan to improve pedestrian access, we recognize that there is a need to proactively go out and construct those sidewalk gaps. And so in the State of the System report, we've demonstrated how successful that program has been in completing critical gaps around the city, but also underscoring that at current funding levels, there's a long timeline to completing all those gaps in the city. And so it's an important benchmark for us to think about. If our goal of mobility, and as Taylor mentioned, that modal hierarchy with pedestrians at the top, providing a pedestrian system that gives dignity to people who are walking around, especially people with different abilities, then we need a complete sidewalk system. So we do have benchmarks about how that program has progressed, but also underscore that there's a lot of work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Well, I've got one more. I want to take us in a different direction, but then I know we need to wrap up here, Sam, but kind of going in a different direction. Future, we're thinking 2050. We got some questions in the chat about how are we thinking about all the things we don't know. So by 2050, are we in flying cars, or, is everybody in autonomous vehicles driving around? So how does this plan factor in some of these long-term sort of transportation innovative ideas that could be in place by then? How are we thinking about those now and planning for them for the future?
Totally. So this goes back to the last phase of the project, which we called our plausible future. So what could happen in the year 2050? What could Denver look like? What could change? And so we actually solicited input from the broader public. More than 3,000 people weighed in and told us what was the most important things to plan for, what could change in our city. Mm-hmm. And so we used all that information to create 4 different versions of what Denver could look like. I will emphasize none of them had flying cars. We didn't think that was a reasonable thing that could happen by the year 2050. But one of the kind of like new technologies that's on the horizon is autonomous vehicles. And using information that we have about them today, we wanted to understand what the implications for travel would be in Denver if everyone had access to an autonomous vehicle. And what those findings show, particularly in regard to that technology, is that it would likely induce more driving. Driving would become easier to do. So we will be publishing the next section of the Denver Moves report, which goes all into scenario planning and what the results were. We also have more information about that work on our website. So that's bit.ly, Denver Moves Everyone. Maybe Lucy, if you could drop that link in the chat. That's our home base for the Denver Moves project, different from the online website where we're asking for engagement. So we did our best to try to think about the whole spectrum of things that could change and really future-proof this plan so that no matter what happens, say autonomous vehicles are really picking up, we've got a strategy to manage that. Say that transit build out really ramps up, we have a strategy to align investments in that to make sure that we maximize those types of investments. So we're trying to do our best to plan for an uncertain future. Nothing is going to pan out, but that's the benefit of a strategic plan like Denver Moves Everyone, where we're not planning for one thing to happen. We're planning for how do we create a durable process that is nimble and we can react to an uncertain future.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Sam. This has been great. Keep those comments coming. We are tracking all of these. We are capturing all this information. It'll definitely be informing the plan as we move forward. But Sam, we have a couple more slides. Would you like to walk us through the
Absolutely.
next step here?
So to come full circle, I think I saw a question of the chat of when can we meet again? So if we go to the next slide, just wanted to kind of bring up our schedule. And so, as I mentioned, this phase of engagement, which we talked to you all about tonight, and I hope you can go share from the rooftops, denvermoveseveryone.com, is going through the end of June. We're going to be taking that feedback as soon as this phase closes and building that into our technical work. So we're actually developing that plan of projects and investments, those programs and those services that we need to implement in the near term to achieve our long-term vision and goals, informed by the feedback you provided. Should we focus more on expansion? Should we focus more on improvements? What about operations and maintenance? How do we bring those slices of the pie together in our constrained reality? We don't have unlimited dollars. And then as we move into the fall, we want to come back to you. What is that plan for the next 6 years? Where are we hoping to invest? And then beyond that, where do we need to be in 15 years? Where do we need to be in 20? And as well as all the way out to the horizon by 2050 to create that visionary future of what Denver could be. How do we create that world-class transportation system? That's what we're building towards. And so we'll come back in the fall, we'll present our draft recommendations, and we'll look for you to weigh in on that. And then we're immediately, this isn't just a plan that ends, we publish a document, it goes on our website. We'll be immediately converting that into our investment strategy and scaling that across all of the investment programs at DOTI. So some really exciting work is coming down the pike, and we appreciate everyone's participation in helping us to orient our investments in the best way possible.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everybody's participation. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your feedback. For those of you on the phone, please don't forget denvermoveseveryone.com. We would absolutely love your feedback. It is essential that we hear from you as we are in a very critical time for this project as we begin to look at prioritization. So denvermoveseverybody.com. We would love your feedback. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and ideas. We really, really appreciate it. So have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.